I know you really hate communism, but I think it's really important to understand the history of what happened. And during the interwar period, communism wasn't exactly viewed as a horrible like governmental view because, for example, like in the case that Japan was invading Manchuria and a lot of other countries, China turned away from nationalism and into communism because they didn't feel that they felt that being part of nationalism would actually support Japan, and even the League of Nations couldn't stop Japan from invading a lot of other countries. So what was China to do? So I think that what they were really trying to do was they were trying to find a way to have the society become really equal for other people and actually support the peasants. And this communist movement went from the countryside into the city side, and like they really showed people what communism can do. And they, even though today, even though in other revolutions that we see that communism actually starts from the city to countryside, this actually went from the countryside to the city side. And I think it's communism isn't exactly the worst kind of thing because in the interwar period, being a nationalist was viewed as a really negative thing because the Japanese set a really bad example of what nationalists are supposed to do. So China actually showed that communism isn't a bad thing. Even though the U.S. was very against it, a lot of people had very set mind points on communism. However, considering the history and knowing what Japan did, knowing that Japan was invading, was fighting over Russia, fighting Russia over Manchuria, and invading China, communism would be viewed as a bad thing. And a lot of people think that communism in the interwar period was just a way to avoid Japan's problems, but Japan actually had a lot of different ways to solve their problems, but they chose to invade different nations, and that was a really negative way to do that. And I think even though communism today, yeah, you can say that communism is bad, but in the interwar period, it was a good thing. It was a way for people and countries to get away from the Japanese influence, and the Japanese influence was the complete taking over countries. And because they didn't have colonies, they didn't have places for their growing populations to emigrate to. They had to they justify it by saying that, but China, as one of the countries that got invaded, they had to turn to a government system in which they weren't being taken over by other colonies. So that would be communism. They wanted to give a lot of power to peasants, and that was lacking in a lot of different countries. But since giving power to peasants is really important, communism is actually not a bad governmental system. Thank you.